All right, this is Jack Donovan, and you are listening to or watching PH2T3R, Pater, the Journal of Solar Culture. I'm joined, as always, with my co-host, CB Robertson, author of many fine books. And today we're going to talk about the Santa cult. And this was CB's idea. I asked him what we should do a show about last week, and he's like, "What about the Santa cult?" And it was probably because he was knee-deep in Santa stuff, being a dad. And it occurred to him, but it struck me as being actually a very interesting idea in terms of. I did a little research today. I mean, I knew this before, but I wanted to verify it. But Santa's new. I mean, Santa's fairly new, like within the last like 250 years. And really, our idea of Santa, like my idea growing up of Santa, is pretty much a 20th century invention. Like
Yeah.
basically, there were all kinds of little mythological things that came together, but the anonymous poem, which we all kind of know, like the it was originally called, what is it here? I have it up on screen here.
Are you talking about Twist the
It's a
Knife?
visit from Saint Nicholas, is what it's originally called, but we all call it the night before Christmas, and that was like 1823,
Wow.
and
That's
that's
actually
kind of
older
when
than I
it.
thought.
Yeah,
Interesting.
well, I mean that was a start, and we all kind of know that poem. Like I'm not beginning to end. I couldn't tell it to you right now, but like the little lines for it, like not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. I mean, we've all heard that as kids, and it's been part of our thing. But that's only 1823. But and then it really didn't become this big part of popular culture. Like the Wikipedia explains it. It goes down through like the evolution of Santa when he got a red outfit and all that, and it's all very late 19th, early 20th century. And the reason why we think this is interesting, we're not like hating on Santa or anything. It's more like CB brought it up to me, and I thought about it, and it got bigger in my head, and I realized that this is a myth that was created like within a few generations and then became a powerful and positive and like nostalgic and influential part of people's like everyday lives. This cherished thing in society that was basically envisioned by artists. This is an anonymous poem that the one that became A Night Before Christmas. That's an anonymous poem that was published, and someone just dreamed that up in their head. And obviously they're pulling from a couple influences. There was the Dutch Sinterklaas and a couple, and Saint Nicholas and a whole bunch of things. But this is really relevant to what we're doing with the Order of Fire and solar idealism because it's a syncretic myth. They're pulling together all these influences from different cultures
Yeah.
and created this new idea based on all of them. So the Santa Claus is this myth that's like been put together by artists and creative people, and then it was developed by Hollywood and all this stuff. So you have all this things, but it's been envisioned by artists, and it became a popular part of life. And this is where I will turn to you because you mentioned it in terms of your Greg Nagy quote.
Right.
Nosh.
It is a myth, but it's more than a myth because like a
Mhm.
myth is a story, but this is
Right.
a cultural institution that we participate in. Which and there's a technical anthropological term for this, which is not just a myth but a cult, which is a sort of a religion, and specifically we could say a hero cult because it's not revolving around an individual living person. Cult has this very negative connotation we have today. Mostly whenever the head of a cult is a living person, we call it like a cult of personality, and this is people are brainwashed and they're having sex with the leader and whatever. Hero cults are a lot more trustworthy when the center is someone dead or has died a long time ago. But before cults developed this negative current connotation. It was a, anthropological term that described these sort of proto-religious movements. And by basically every, sort of check mark on the sort of the list of well, what constitutes a hero cult, the Santa Claus myth that we participate in is a hero cult. And again, this is not a negative thing. I would argue in this case, it's a positive thing, not because cults are good or cults are bad, but like there are good cults and bad cults. I would say, some people would say Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a pretty cool cult, although the founders are still living there, so the jury's still out. But the Santa Claus cult is a more classic kind of hero cult, because not all cults focused on a god or a living person in this way. And the reason that it seems particularly relevant, because we've both been having conversations about the sort of solar ideal deities, the archetypal gods, the Father, the Striker, the Lord of the Earth. And there are many people we've run into who say, well, this is like, do you believe in these gods? Do you think these are real people? It's like, well, that's not the kind of God we're talking about. And they'll say, well, okay, that's just, so you're basically an atheist who likes, who likes, certain religious aesthetics, because they have a hard time grasping some alternative, a legitimate alternative conception of what a god could be. It's either a historical, literal person or a, nothing, basically. And actually, Conan in the comments here, we've got one comment. I see it as not much different than the story of Christianity as far as how it was formed and constructed, an amalgamation of things that came before. From a historian's perspective, you read someone like who's the guy? The Christianities guy. There's a fairly famous non-religious scholar of the New Testament, Bart Ehrman. There we go. Who makes exactly this argument. There actually wasn't a singular Christianity until about the 2nd century or so, and then it sort of coalesced into a singular thing. But like a big part of Christian theology is that, and its legitimacy is that it can't be syncretic like that, even though historically it probably was. They have to say, no, our God is not an abstract idea. It was a literal person. Bishop Robert Barron put out a video many years ago criticizing Jordan Peterson for Gnosticizing God, saying, no, there's a necessary kind of historicity. Either this person lived and died and rose again, or he did not. And I think a lot of people who look at archetypal notions of gods through a tacitly Christian lens, and they're saying, no, a god is necessarily either it is a person you believe is physically or spiritually real in some sense, in like a historical physical sense, or you're an atheist with Stockholm syndrome or delusions about something or other. They have no conception of an alternative mode of participating in religion. And the Santa cult is a fun one because, as you said, it's a very contemporary one. It is a living, current pagan tradition. But if you ask most people, like, do you believe in Santa Claus? Unless you are a child, and even most children kind of understand this, they go along anyways. Watch kids play; they make believe, pretend all the time. That's what they do 95% of the time, even when they should not be doing that. Belief isn't even a part of it. If you ask someone, like, do you believe in Santa Claus? And they're like, do I look like I'm 3? You'll be like, then why are you taking your kids to the mall? Why are you falsely labeling some of your presents that you're giving your child as though they're from this man that you don't think is real? That they'll look at you weird. It's like, it's a story we're participating in. belief almost has nothing to do with it. And the way I believe, I can't remember if this is from his book. I am referencing Greg Naj again because he's the best expert on hero cult I know of. There are others, but his articulation of heroic myth and the hero cults of ancient Greece at the time is extraordinary, very worth reading for anyone who's interested in this kind of thing. I believe it was when I was interviewing him, though, that he said these are not, and he was speaking of the ancient Greek stories. These are not stories you believe in, but stories you live by. And stories you live by, you don't have to believe in it literally in order to live by the example. Maybe a Greek specific one, we could point to the Iliad, right? The entire European chivalric code, the idea of the knight, of the paladin, goes back to the so-called 9 worthies, these 9 exemplars of manly romantic virtue that all of the European chivalry were to uphold and aspire to. And the first of these, there were 3 pagans, 3 Jews, and 3 Christians listed. But the first, the pagans were the first, and the first of the pagans was Hector. Hector was the first ideal for the knight. And there's a good chance he never existed. Did it matter to the European chivalry that he probably didn't exist, or that the man who existed was probably not one-to-one identical with the character depicted by Homer in the Iliad? No, the ideal lives apart from the historicity of the story, and it lives. And when I say it lives apart, it lives in an organic social fashion. The idea has a life of its own, which is a sort of a theme in heroic epic, which you see not just in Greg Naj's work, but also in Adam Nicholson's wonderful, wonderful book, Why Homer Matters, where he contrasts the sort of Irish poetic tradition, where there are accounts of poets who, or reciting things from an oral tradition, and some scholars have discovered some written evidence of the poems that no one had seen before, and they contrasted and compared the poet's 400-year-old recollected recitation to the written account, and over like 18 hours of recitation, there were like 4 words that were changed, like almost perfect memory across like a dozen generations or so, contrasted with like the Balkan rhetorical tradition, where stories 20 years ago, the epic poetry they were composing about the First World War, it had only been 20 years and they already changed all the details. Like, it was a completely different story except for a couple main characters' names, and that was it. So like there's a lot of variation and a lot of corruption in the historicity of any kind of tradition, unless you're an Irish poet, apparently. But like that doesn't matter actually to many people if your theology isn't contingent upon a singular creator God being true in some like ontological sense. Thousands upon thousands of cultures, including some living ones today, much of Hinduism operates in this way, get by with notions of God that are much closer to Santa Claus. And the reason Santa Claus is so nice is that people have a really hard time grasping this concept of a god or a hero until you give them a current living example that they're already participating in the same way that people have a hard time sort of wrapping their head around pagan sacrifice. And you say, well, it's basically just Thanksgiving turkey, but like every month or whatever, or maybe every week, but you give thanks over the meal you're about to eat anyways, and there's a special ritualistic way in which you're supposed to do it. It doesn't necessarily involve turning a bird into a a bomb in your backyard. They had better ways of doing that, but it's many of these things that feel very old and very foreign are fun to see us almost rediscover the sort of pre-modern theology in our own living myths, whether that's Thanksgiving, which is also relatively recent, or Santa Claus, which is even more recent. And Santa is, in an anthropological sense, a hero cult, but I would argue it's a good hero cult and a very positive one during a very a light one, we could say, during a very dark season.
Yeah, yeah, it's very like, and all the elements of ritual that people are actually participating in. People talk about ritual as if it's this alien thing, and
Gift giving around a tree,
like living the putting the gift giving around the tree. Sure, that's regular Christmas. That could be Santa Claus or not, right?
Yeah.
But the leaving the cookies out.
Yeah.
Leaving the cookies out for Santa, like the parents fake biting them, whatever, sometimes to like make it like Santa took a bite. I saw like an Instagram video of somebody making fake snow footprints on the floor. There's all these things that Santa is supposed to do, and the way that parents actually creatively interact with this myth.
Magic, yeah.
Yeah, and they're helping create it too, and it's a creative process for them. So they're interacting with this myth and performing rituals, and also doing some variation on it. They're doing their own like interpretation of it for their own family and whatever. And so it's just such a great example of how ritual is performed in regular life, and people don't even know it because it's so normal.
Yeah.
They don't think about it as ritual, but that is exactly what it is. You're literally like leaving an offering out for a deity that comes down through your chimney, and will the deity take my thing? It's really a very culty thing that they're doing. And it's just fascinating to think of it that way. I've never really thought about it much at all until you mentioned it, that we should do the show on it. And now it's inspiring in the sense of, well, what is possible with myth and some of the stuff that we're doing with the Order of Fire and the First Men and the solar idealism is like, well, how can we participate in these ancient myths and update them and make them relevant for ourselves? Like how can we do that? And it jogged my memory is in terms of thinking about I've always given the example of Germanic paganism because obviously I did some research and was involved in that and doing rituals and so forth for several years, and that was something that was basically resurrected. This is this forgotten thing that in the nationalistic movements of like the 19th century, everyone wanted their own national myth. They thought that they needed that. So all the Germanic countries, the Scandinavians and whatever, and I think Finland came up with their own. There's several different like national myths that were like developed for those countries and were resurrected. Like, where is our national myth? We have to go find one. And so they resurrected these Icelandic poems, this Icelandic literature, and then developed on it, made a whole bunch of art, which is a lot of the pictures of Odin and so forth that we see. And then that came up through the early 19th century, and some people got especially fascinated with that in that period, and there was a lot more art made in that time. And then that went to sleep basically for a while, and they were just stories again. It was just folklore again. And then in the 70s, some people thought that they wanted to have a religion. A lot of them were people who just wanted to have a religion that Jews weren't involved in. And so they wanted a white person religion. And so a lot of people resurrected these ideas like, this is our real religion, even though it's been dead for 1,000 years. This is our real religion. We're going to resurrect this. And, then like I say, several people, one of the guys that I met actually developed a lot of the literature that we see about that. Edward Thorson or Stephen Flowers. I mean, developed a lot of the literature, and he was a scholar, and he brought a lot of these things forward. And then you got to a point, and they were just started practicing making up their own rituals and stuff in the 70s because we don't know what they did. And so these, again, creative people started making up rituals. And then flash forward another 20 years, you have people out there practicing, like praying to like these gods that are ancient, which are basically characters in stories that they've now added this narrative to, and they're participating in them. And they don't most of those people don't necessarily believe that those gods are like literally real, but they believe that they're connected to something.
Right.
They're connected to some kind of ancient history. But again, this is something that has happened in, the span of 50 or 60 years, is that you've have these ideas that were stories, and then they become a real part of people's lives and a real meaningful part of people's lives. And that's why I think it shows what's possible, because we think of the whole postmodern ideal, like the past is all the past, and everything's bullshit, and the past is just nothing new can be created. Nothing new like this can be created from
There's
here.
nothing
Nothing
new under
meaningful.
the sun.
Yeah, and that's clearly not true. Like I said, Santa was made up, basically in the last 200 years.
It's another weirdly new religious addition to Christmas, which feels very old, but which is actually very new, is Krampus. It comes out of Austria and certain parts of Germany and Switzerland, but it's kind of spread out over Europe, and now that it's happening in other places in the United States and so forth. Is this this kind of demon figure, this goat-headed, furry Sasquatch-looking thing that in the original stories, Saint Nicholas actually has on a leash, basically like a chain. They're his little demonic attack dog things, but he controls them. And so Saint Nicholas would come into people's houses with the Krampus on a chain, and the Krampus would threaten the small children, as you do in Germany, right? They have their scary Hans Christian Andersen stories, and their Krampuses at Christmas time, and the kids would sing a song or recite a poem and talk about how good they were or whatever, and that Saint Nicholas would protect them from the Krampus, and give them gifts and whatever else. But that's from like the 19th century. That is not some ancient Middle East or like middle-aged thing. Although it's not like there weren't some kind of similar-ish traditions that popped up organically. I remember seeing something about like a Welsh clatter horse or something. It's not really the same thing, but
there are all kinds of weird traditions in European towns. Like weird like folk traditions. Like when I went to one of my trips to Germany, went to this like ski mountain town, Garmisch-Partenkirchen, and there were like in the museum there, it showed people dressed up in weird outfits with bags over their heads and went out to like the young men went out and chased people with sticks and stuff. Like they did all kinds of weird shit. Like each one of these towns probably had its own weird like thing over time. But
it's fun noticing the differences, but also the similarities between these sorts of traditions, and you can end up with another point that Greg Naj brought up in our conversation in tracing etymologies, is that sometimes there is a superficial etymological similarity, but there's no actual connection. Like word B, which sounds similar to word A, didn't actually evolve from word A. But he says there are these things called folk etymologies, where certain sound, like people create words that are similar, and like there's a reason that they sound similar. And he says scholars don't like this because you can't really prove a folk etymology. So it's not rewarded in academia in the way that like a true etymology would be. But that doesn't make them not real. I don't remember what I was asking him about that that led to that discussion. I was fascinated by I think it was the chorus and the choreos connection. I was saying the Greek chorus, the tragic chorus, which is a basically a crowd participation in the play, seemed to have a similar ritual role as the Proto-Indo-European choreos, which is this like the manner bun, this group of adolescent young men in sort of societal no man's land who become these sort of raiding parties of cattle thieves and petty crime and and so forth, and they sort of earn honor amongst each other, and they're very different, but they're also similar in learning in their sort of liminal space for adolescents who are learning the myths that integrate them into society as a whole. People come through the Greek tragic chorus with an understanding of the myths that make up their society. Young men come through the choreos with an understanding of the myths and the identity of the dead ancestor warriors who they take, whose identity they take on. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're like the same word. And Greg Naj was like, it sounds similar, but there's a different root here. The etymology didn't work, but there's this folk etymology similarity that maybe, you can't disprove it. So I'm going to stick to that.
The choreos itself is fascinating, and it almost fits what we're talking about. It's essentially an anthropological idea. It's a theory.
Yeah.
There is no choreos. There's no like record of that actual a thing by that name. Yeah. It's like it's extracted from patterns of things that happen in different places, like the Cryptea with the Spartans, and like it's anthropologists put that together.
Doing the
there's not I mean, and it's a valid thing. Obviously, the young war band thing it's a vibe. Like I know how to do it. It's a vibe. The young man's warband thing, and it also is something that is it doesn't work the same as you get older. But that 18 to 24-year-old
even today, you don't need a Proto-Indo-European population. You can look at inner cities and the gang initiations, or all the gangs got wiped out. The cartel initiations, they replaced the gangs. So same thing. Young men doing small petty crimes, sometimes not so petty crimes.
Tom Sawyer.
Yeah.
Like literally anytime you get young groups of young men together, they start to do the same stuff. Like they start to like haze each other in different ways and dare each other to do things. And it's a very consistent concept, but people build out. I've watched people since I learned of this choreos, which would be probably, in the last 10 years. And it was a thing floating around in anthropological circles, but like I said, there's no actual choreos. There's an idea of what the choreos must have been. It's one of those things like evolutionary psychology, or
I was on a real etymological
linguistics
false limb there. But
no. I mean, I'm not criticizing that, but I've watched this actually take. There are all kinds of accounts out there that like talk about the choreos and have like basically fan fictioned it out into being like this real thing. And this is actually I've looked at whole like descriptions on X, and like there are all kinds of accounts that have choreos in them, and they're like, this is what they did, and then they imagine what it was like to be part of the choreos, this anthropological concept that doesn't actually like there's no record of, and so it's again, it's like one of these myths that's come out of an idea and now has taken on this life of its own for a lot of these people. So it kind of fits the same pattern of what we're talking about.
Yeah. And what I was trying to get at with talking about folk etymologies as a sort of metaphor for the similarities and differences between various cults that emerge in different societies that are often slightly different, but have some interesting similarities too. It can be hard to tell if there's a lineage there, conscious or unconscious, or if there's just coincidences, if they're like folk etymologies, if different towns happen to come up with gift-giving heroes in wintertime because there's something like at a DNA level, like correct for our condition about that or something, in the same way that certain ideas seem to have a correct sound in language vis-a-vis folk etymologies. And again, we're in the domain of things that really can't be proved one way or another, but it's fun to think about and fun dynamics to think about when comparing different hero cults, whether it's Santa Claus with Santa Claus or St. Nicholas, going all the way back to the Council of Nicaea, where St. Nicholas supposedly slapped a heretic or whatever. That's not very similar to the Santa Claus we see today. But maybe not even a folk etymology there. But these kinds of similarities are fun to look at, but it doesn't mean that we aren't still creating them from, maybe not from scratch, but from what we have. And like, a tradition doesn't have to be pre-existing in order to be legitimate necessarily.
You just need buy-in.
Right. Basically.
You just need buy-in. Like, you just need buy-in. It's like if you get a group of people doing a thing and they do it year after year after year, it's a tradition. Boom. That's how it happens. And that's the point I like to make. People think that it's a joke. I keep bringing up this thing that people say on X is you can just do things. You can just do things. You can literally start a tradition. You can just do things. And that's, we have the power to do that. And that's what people have always done, is like, well, what makes sense? What did we like? What worked and what didn't work? Like what's works for the human animal at this particular point in time. What do we need? I think is a very, and obviously Santa Claus, and you could probably loop it into the Industrial Revolution or some, like, why now? Like, why did we need a gift giving guy to come down chimneys in the 20th century?
And what's
like, why now?
It's continuing to evolve too. One that we can kind of see the formation of in more or less real time is, we were mentioning this briefly before the show started, is the Grinch. Like, we're very, very aware of his fictional origin. Like, we like, Dr. Seuss is within living memory of like half the population.
Yes. But
imagine what the experience of the Grinch will be like for people 100 years from now, 3 or 4 generations from now. Dr. Seuss, if he's still even around, if his books are still being read, if they haven't been surpassed by other things, might be forgotten except by a few kind of rogue historians or whatever. But imagine if How the Grinch Stole Christmas was anonymous, like the Night Before Christmas poem. We're already beginning to build institutional hero cult architecture around the Grinch. Nowhere near to the level of development as we have around Santa Claus. And the Grinch is an interesting one because he's very much like many of the Greek heroes who got hero cults despite kind of not being good people. Like, if you look at the backstory of Hercules, for example, he did some very bad things. Right. And they didn't embrace that in the sense of saying that bad things were good, but they embraced that as a part of the story. Right. And there's a redemption arc, and you don't need to be a perfect person in order to be a hero. You just need to be very memorable and very symbolically, iconically embodying some idea. And the Grinch actually does that very well, and doesn't just do it very well, but does it very succinctly and very poetically. There's a whole Martin Heidegger essay that Michael Millerman has gone over about the poetical mode of philosophizing. And he was speaking specifically about Nietzsche, and the question that Heidegger was pondering was, is there something philosophically important and maybe even necessary about philosophizing by means of poetry rather than just kind of exposition in a kind of more modern essay format? And there's something very powerful about the poetical mode for this kind of myth creation, whether with Santa Claus and the Night Before Christmas or How the Grinch Stole Christmas. But not only is the Grinch this kind of not perfect character, he's kind of a bad guy, at least for most of the story that we have of him. First of all, but second of all, we're very, very aware that he is a fictional character, and that is not a problem at all for creating this kind of hero cult infrastructure around him, and beginning to build that component of the that part of Christmas out. And there's, going back to the folk etymology things, there are some funny similarities between the Grinch and the Krampus that we mentioned too, not just in their role but in their physicality even. That's a sort of an aside. So anyways, long way of making the point about stories, basically a long-winded way of saying religious stories don't have to be stories you believe in order to be legitimate. They can be stories you live by. Another beautiful example of this comes from a musician, actually, going off of Christmas for a moment. There was a video put out, I believe it was on Tool's official YouTube channel. It might have been Maynard James Keenan, the lead singer's YouTube channel, but it came out on Easter a few years ago. And for those of you who don't know, Maynard James Keenan, I guess, got tired of just being a musician, so he opened a farm. Basically, he grows grapes, makes wine, has a restaurant, does all that stuff. But he's got a bunch of ducks, and there was a year where one of his ducks went missing. And so they went out, he got like his kid and his wife and a couple of the farm hands to go out and look for this duck that was missing. And they ended up, because they didn't want to let predators get it, and they found it. They found the duck, and the duck had laid an egg. And it was like they realized they had just participated on a kind of egg hunt. And so he said, he used that little personal story as a springboard to talk about, like, what are we doing when we have these kids go on these egg hunts in spring? And he talks a lot about the symbolism of the egg, the sort of occult symbolism of this source of life and return and eternal life and everything. But it's also a sort of reenactment, a participatory reenactment of searching for food when you don't have any, where the difference between finding an egg and not finding an egg can be the difference between eating it and not eating. And we make it fun. We make it something, exciting and play, basically, for kids, for their entertainment. But it is sort of ritual training in the hunter-gatherer skills necessary for survival. And he says there's something powerful in not forgetting that origin. And that's you don't necessarily need to believe in the occult symbolic significance of the egg that he mentions in order to buy into this. But that is it's additional symbolic layering that probably was not there when the Easter egg hunts were first created. I have no idea when that happened. I doubt that's the actual origin story of it. But maybe it's also doing that. And it's in the same way, it's a story we can live by, even if it's not a story you believe in per se. Like, you're not, when you go on an Easter egg hunt, you don't have to believe that you must find these eggs or you'll die in order to get it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I had to look that up because I was like, well, now I'm curious about the Easter Bunny. And like, well, and it looks like the Easter Bunny actually precedes Santa Claus. The Easter Bunny, it says there's like a bunny, a hare bringing Easter eggs was known to be a custom already in like 1682.
Oh wow!
So yeah. So it looks like it was like a German tradition of an Easter hare bringing eggs for the children.
I just looked it up. It's on Pucifer.com's YouTube channel from a year ago, and the title of the video is Pucifer: An Easter Story, and it's 7 minutes long. So very worth checking out. From Easter of 2023. So it'll be 2 years old this coming spring. Just similar sort of dynamic of hero cults, though Easter's different because there isn't a hero if you're not a Christian. It's its own ritual of custom. Or yeah, I think that's the right way of saying it.
Although very similar, I mean, in terms of like Easter Bunny bringing things for kids, like a very very similar custom, and also again, a thing that people ritually participate in. I had to laugh because you said about the people writing the names of gifts, like who gave them the gift from Santa or whatever on their kids' things. I mean, I'm 50 years old. My mom still sends me a little box full of things, and they're labeled like from the Elves and from like she still does that. And so like that's like that same thing happens with the Easter Bunny. Like people, I think I don't think I get an Easter basket anymore, mostly because I'm so health conscious that I've said, please do not send me a box full of candy chocolate every year. Like that. I do not want, but for a long time, I still did get, as an adult, I still did get Easter baskets. And that's, the same thing is like, parents, filling up Easter baskets and stuff for their kids. Sometimes that's the very similar, like what did the Easter Bunny give me or whatever, was a thing, I think, at least when I was growing up. So it's another myth that we know, that the Easter Bunny really doesn't make baskets and they don't even lay eggs. Yeah, bunnies don't even lay eggs. That's the crazy part about the whole thing.
Yeah, but like that doesn't. But why is it that little detail doesn't seem to get in the way of the perpetuation of the myth,
right?
And of our participation in this myth? It's almost as if it's not about stories you believe in and never was. It's like belief in that kind of scientific historical sense is not and never was the point. And that's the thing that is very, very hard for people who are sort of have been brought up in a tacitly Christian conception of religiosity, have a very hard time wrapping their heads around.
Well, yeah, because they have this capital T truth that they're always talking about,
right?
So we have the truth, the capital T truth, and that is literally what happens. And you can't, if that's not the truth, then you're not one of them.
Yeah.
So that's
rabbits don't lay eggs, and there are some mathematical problems with Santa delivering billions of presents to millions of children all around the world. Like that, right. that doesn't check, the physics doesn't check out. Some nerds on Reddit did the math, but for some reason, no matter how many times they show it, no one seems to care.
Yeah, no one cares.
To
Shut
the
up,
public's
nerds.
credit.
Get back in the locker. Yeah.
to the public's credit.
Yes.
Because they recognize that, you know, what's going on here is actually not is not contingent upon that, and the legitimacy of these traditions isn't contingent upon some kind of scientific factuality or historicity.
Right. And one has to wonder how much that even mattered to people before, the 20th century. The idea of like exact history. I mean, obviously there are people writing histories before that,
Yeah.
but we also know that their histories were a little sketchy. Like
Yeah.
well, like that they
there
were.
was a
I heard a story and a story from a story, and whenever that history itself overlapped significantly with what we think of as myth. There's a lot of that. As you said, the Trojan War and Hector being a perfect example of that.
right, and it's not as though the entirety of this focus upon capital T truth and historicity belongs solely to Christianity. There's a there is a fun YouTube channel that I will recommend to people called Sam O'Nella, spelled as if it's an Irish last name, like Sam O hyphen or O apostrophe Nella. He's a low brow squiggle art YouTube channel with like, almost 5 million subscribers. His last video got like 2 million views in like a day, but his last video was a summary of Pliny the Elder's first encyclopedia. Actually, the first 2 chapters of Pliny the Elder's encyclopedia, who's a Latin writer, among other things, sort of a philosopher, sort of a what you would call a natural philosopher. And much of his work was a just absolute lambasting of the silly things that people believed, in the way that a sort of Redditor would do today about people's religious beliefs. But like part of it, he talks about how there is one God at most. There probably is a God, but he probably doesn't care about it. He doesn't say probably. I'm sorry. He said it's absurd to imagine that God would care about like what people are doing on the world. And he has that kind of dismissive mockery, and he takes some time to actually mock the sort of hero cults and the worshiping of fever as like a divine force and things like that. He's like, this is ridiculous. And he was, of course, not a Christian. So people have a literalist, historicist strain in them, which is practical and makes a lot of sense. We want to know the facts about things in the world, and we want to investigate that. So it's not a matter of giving up our interest in the natural world. It's more a matter of recognizing what kind of genre are you reading. Are you reading a history book and judging it as a novel? Because you are going to be let down. Or are you reading a novel or watching a movie? Are you watching Mel Gibson's Braveheart and being like, it didn't happen that way actually at the Battle of Stirling. It was at the bridge. This is all like you're missing the point. You're missing what we're doing here. Imagine watching a historian watching 300 and being like, that's not how Xerxes actually was. This
dude,
is a Michael Bay movie.
Dude, you missed. You missed. We were literally having this conversation in the First Men today because several of us have watched Gladiator 2 now, and I tried to watch it twice. I couldn't get into it, and
I've heard bad things about it.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to like it because I really like Gladiator 1. It's a very defining. It's a very defining film for me, and so I wasn't really expecting to like it. And then I I tried to watch it, and the second time I watched it, it just wasn't grabbing me. But I was kind of like, it was Christmas, I was drinking, and then I'm like, wait, do they have sharks in the Coliseum? Are you kidding me? Like I'm like that's, and I literally had to check because I'm like they did. I knew that they had done naval battles and things like that. That was a real thing.
actually did
And
put
I was like,
crocodiles in there.
I'm like, you can't just bring in sharks. I mean, like that's they didn't have the knowledge to do like that level of thing
I
because
would have
it
believed
really
that.
sharks. What?
I would have believed that if the Romans, if anyone could do it, it wouldn't surprise me if we were reading some history text, and because I know that there were cases of them bringing crocodiles in. Sharks
Yeah,
is a
well,
little bit
crocodiles are
cleared
one
up.
thing, but like if you've ever had a saltwater aquarium, you know that the levels of anal that you have to go in to make sure that the water's right so the fish don't all die is
Yeah,
like pretty extreme.
yeah,
Like you're measuring pH and salinity, and if there's too much salt and whatever, they literally would have had to truck in the actual water from the actual ocean, and then kept it at the a reasonable temperature.
yeah.
Like there's so much stuff that would have to happen. I mean, obviously sharks are probably pretty hardy as fish go. They're not like coral. Like coral, like forget about it. Like coral or like like sea anemones or anything like that. I know because I've had a few saltwater aquariums like that. They're like delicate little flowers. Like they the slightest change in the water in the way. But I was like, okay, sharks. That's too far. That's too far. And yeah, it was just kind of funny because we had a guy in the group who just liked the movie because it was fun. Like enjoyed the movie, and then
Yeah.
two of us, a few of us were like, I didn't really like it, and also too far with the sharks. Too far. We're like that was
Fair
ridiculous.
enough. Yeah.
That was too far.
I mean,
But
that is the risk.
yeah,
If you go too far, you break the immersion. Like now
yeah,
you can go so far that immersion is not even an issue anymore. Like if you watch like Django Unchained or something, and you see someone get shot with a pistol and they fly off the screen sideways, like, okay, we're not even trying for realism, so the lack of realism is no longer a problem, and that's fine. But if a movie passes itself off as history, and then it gets things wrong, then we have some complaints to make. Then we can say, and my favorite example to bring up on this is A Handmaid's Tale, because that book claims that it's actually very realistic because every aspect of the story is drawn from like little bits of real things that happened in real places, and so there's this syncretic notion of realism, but it's completely unrealistic in the balance because all of those things were in real life counterbalanced by other things. So it's creating something completely unrealistic, but claiming the author claims that it's actually very realistic because it's comprised of things that actually happened. And it's like that's not how that works
right.
at all. But with something like and to answer Wilhelmer's for I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Question: is this a pro or anti Santa cult stream? This is a very pro Santa cult stream. It's actually pro good cults generally. Santa cult is just one very easy, probably the largest contemporary hero cult around. We're using cult in the anthropological sense, um, but many of these hero cults are not in the way of A Handmaid's Tale, passing themselves off as historical. Like, I don't think anybody who reads "Twas the Night Before Christmas," like, we're not thinking that this is something that did happen or could happen. It's a poem. It is above and apart from, um, like that. It's a different genre. It's a different genre is the best way to put it, I think. And it's about you have to judge works, whether it's novels or religions or cults or whatever, by their own standards, and that's where I would say we don't need to get into this because it's maybe not the season for that. Where Christianity maybe runs into troubles is this is a Nietzsche point, anyways. Its own standards causes problems for itself, but the Santa cult and as we were talking about with the Easter Bunny, they don't make quite the same kind of grand claims about themselves. They're saying that the Christmas Santa cult claim is essentially participate in my myth and the holiday will be wonderful. You will become closer with family. You will create and enjoy a festive season in what would otherwise be a dark and cold and low in vitamin D season. And I think it delivers on that promise, broadly speaking.
Yeah. Well, and then you have, because I'm an advanced level Grinch. So I was just
I'm getting
complaining all
there.
week about. I was just complaining all week about how like everybody is fake happy, but they're driving around in traffic being assholes. Everyone acts like an asshole for like the whole fucking month of December, and especially these past 2 weeks. They're driving around, they're stressed out about everything. They're like, you go to the mall and there's like, get out of my way, Karen. Like there's all this shit that's going on. But and then everybody goes home and like, we're happy people. I don't know. I obviously see the other side of it because I don't do the regular Christmas thing. But I'm just like, oh, I can't wait till this week is over so people stop acting like assholes. But anyway, it's it is what it is, and we'll see. Who knows? You said about what will Santa cult look like, and the Grinch looked like in a few generations, and who knows? I mean, maybe they'll go away.
It's hard to
Or maybe
predict,
they won't.
but it feels
Yeah.
like the Grinch is bringing some kind of for all the reasons you were describing, and I've been feeling this too the last few days, to be totally frank.
Mhm.
Some kind of yin yang completion to the season. Like, well, it would not be a complete, or as James Lindsay would say, a mature tradition if it doesn't acknowledge the sort of dark side. If it doesn't acknowledge and address the darker feelings that people are having and give a mythic place for those things, either in the Krampus or in the Grinch or in something else. And like we might see some additional additions over the next 100 years as well. But it's very hard to predict these things. Someone was asking me after The Hero and the Man came out if there were any sort of contenders for modern heroes in our age. And I said, well, one example, there was a few examples. I won't go into a couple of them because we don't need to here. But one of them that came to mind was Chris McCandless, the Into the Wild kid who died in Alaska. And the reason he came to mind for a while was because the bus where he died was still there. And people started making pilgrimages to it to go visit it after the book came out. And then a movie came out and people started going out to see where he had died, to visit him in a not quite formalized ritual, but in kind of an informally ritualistic manner. And it's like that there was a seedling of a possibility of the beginning of some kind of hero cult there. But then the state of Alaska crushed that by moving the van. And now I think any chance of that taking off is basically gone. But that he died in 1990, if I remember correctly. So these things are always changing. They're always evolving. Even the very, very old things are still, we might see some new things over the next 100 years in a way that's very hard to predict. So who knows? The Grinch might very well still be around by then, but we'll have to see.
Maybe. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. We'll see. It'll shape into something else.
Bill
Um,
Helmer says Santa is the archetype of Western civilization, a mixture of Odin and Christ. Once Santa and Christmas are gone, we are gone. Well, that's a very positive, pleasant way of putting it. I would like to be idealized as Santa. Maybe not quite so fat, but generous and riding around in a sleigh. Winter sounds quite nice, especially the flying part. But maybe the point there is that if he didn't exist, we would have had to have invented him, right? Which sort of gets to the crux of the matter, I think, as far as what we're talking about with archetypal deities of this kind in general. If it would, like, suppose you ran into a society in northern Canada, and for some reason Santa never made it there. But they're like one of these like crazy isolated, they live in igloos kind of thing. But Coca-Cola made it there. And you learn that they've been celebrating something very much like Christmas with ritualistic gift giving and everything, except instead of an old man dressed in red in a sleigh driven by reindeer, there's a particular polar bear that comes by. It's the good bear that comes by at one day of the year and leaves bits of food and nuts and seeds and reminders of spring, even flowers or something in people's shoe rooms or something. Like you have a character, maybe it's an animal, maybe it's not even a person, who does these things. Like, is Santa gone at the spiritual level that you're talking about, or did we just express in mythic form our own highest idealizations, our highest conceptualizations of what we would like to be? And maybe
Yeah, I mean, obviously people will keep making myths, and it'll be a new myth at a new time for whatever reason, whatever happens. Obviously, he was going with a kind of stupid racial consciousness way, that's our people. No, it's not. It doesn't matter. Like something else will happen. Like obviously, when like Homer will still be around. Yeah, Homer will still be right. I mean, see people stop believing in Jesus tomorrow.
I've gotten a dozen messages from different people saying, "Did you hear that Christopher Nolan's doing the Odyssey?" I'm like, "Yes, I have heard."
Yes, yeah.
Orville 9999 says, "Do you think mythology and religion will ever be taken as seriously as they were in the past? Or do you think we know too much to ever go back?" Well,
that's a good question.
We can't go back. Of course, but there is a question about how seriously do we think religion was taken in the past? And by seriously, do you mean literally? Because I think people take Santa very seriously. But the fact that they don't take him literally doesn't mean that they don't take him seriously. And our ability to take things seriously but not literally is, I think, a big test of our ability to navigate society and the world today. This is an Ann Coulterism in her critique of the leftists who could never predict anything accurately related to Trump. She says they keep taking him literally but not seriously. They should be taking him seriously but not literally. And I think it's the same Reddit crowd that could never comprehend Trump coming into power that also can't comprehend religion in the same way. They take things literally but not seriously instead of seriously but not literally. But this goes back a ways. If you read St. Augustine's City of God, for example, one of his complaints of the pagans, his criticisms of the pagans, he says, you don't even take your own God seriously. If you read Homer, he was criticizing Homer despite being a big Homer fan in his late teens, early 20s. He said they treat the gods as these kind of, like, he doesn't use the phrase, but like these soap opera characters. They're ridiculous personalities. They're like people. You'd call these characters gods? Of course, Augustine was channeling Plato a little bit there, because this is the point that Plato brings up in the Republic. And it's like he's bringing up the sort of, but Plato, I think, was a little bit more sophisticated than Augustine, because he's bringing up the point in an argument, but not necessarily making the argument himself. He's just bringing it to the table to address it. But there are many good reasons, as we went over in our very long Republic series, to think that Plato actually did take Homer seriously, albeit not literally. Whereas Augustine, once he became a Christian, also became a literalist. And I think that was the beginning of the problem there. But so when we say, do you think mythology and religion will ever be taken as seriously as they were in the past? I think in many ways we already do. I think, but the fact that we're not taking things as literally as Christians in Christendom did, and were in some cases kind of culturally required to, that might be something we can't go back to. I think the whole modernist project of objective truth might be done.
Yeah, well, the thing is, you have people to get that deeply involved in myths, to the point where they do believe them, because people in the ancient world that absolutely went through to like mystery cults and like did all kinds of crazy shit, and up to the point of, people volunteered to be sacrificed themselves, and there was what, the Kabbalites or whatever, like the people the men who volunteered to be castrated for cults that they were in. There were people did crazy shit and definitely really believed what they were doing. Like it wasn't kind of a joke. I don't know to what extent. We can't know. It's unknowable to what extent of the population believed literally in whether the gods or these cult gods or whatever. But the religious impulse in humans isn't going away, and we saw that obviously with like BLM and with the trans thing, whatever. Like there's these religious belief systems that are invented all the time. And they become like, if we say a thing, we'll bring it into existence, kind of thing. And that's what's, you see that again, that impulse doesn't go away. It's just a matter of, but the thing is with the ancient world, the difference between the ancient world and the modern world is isolation. In many senses, okay, it's like if you're in that small mountain town where everyone in the town believes a thing, it becomes more and more and more real. Like if everyone does Santa and no one laughs about it, if we just keep going, and then it becomes more and more real, but you don't have anyone in the outside poking holes in it, like, cause in the way that you would today. Like if I said that, like, I don't know, it's a hard one, because then you have like something like Mormonism. Yeah. Because that's a very new cult that came out, like
very literalist, very
literalist, and here's some actual texts that that changed, are very different from a regular Christianity, and very new, and people believe it, like they're serious about it, and so that's, and despite the fact that people can poke holes in it. Because that's the thing about modernity, is to start a new cult, you have all these people who are going to poke holes in it. Like, well, that's not all the actualities. All that's not literally true. That didn't actually happen. Da, 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 da.
Well, so I think that's because at some deep level, it's the appeal of the story is more important than the literal truth, even though they pay homage to the idea of truth, and they say, well, I believe it literally. But I talk with Mormon missionaries when they come through my neighborhood, often to their own chagrin and regret. But like the sense I get from Mormon missionaries is they say that they believe it's all true literally, as a, like, because that's the line. But like, yes, so I'm saying that I believe it, but that doesn't seem to be what brought them in. Like they came in for other reason, and when they're asked about it, they're saying the lines because that's what you say to someone who asks this kind of question.
Christ is king.
That's not,
Christ is king.
Yeah,
Christ is king.
But that's not. They're not sharing their personal. Like that's not a part of their personal journey in. Their personal journey was through some other path. Other than the pursuit of truth in some kind of St. Christopher first the king, then the devil, then Christ sort of arc. They came in through some other way. I'm not sure what that is, but it's not the way that, like, because you run into Christians, especially in like the Orthodox world or the Catholic world, who spent some time as atheists, and they were very concerned about truth, and then they become convinced, usually by the ontological argument or some version of it, that, oh no, this actually is the truth. They run across the tag of the transcendental argument for God, or something like that, and you're like, oh, and they'll tell you, like, when you ask them, like, what convinced you this, like, I spent 10 years concerned about truth, and I finally found it. It's this. And it's like, and they will. That's not the impression I get from Mormons. And it's not the experience I have with Mormons. And maybe that's an age thing too, because all the missionaries are like 17, 18, 19 or something. But anyways, all that's a long way of saying that I don't think for the point you were saying about isolation and for a few other sort of philosophical reasons, I don't think we're going back to the mode of modernist belief that we had before. But there are a number of assumptions in the idea that we did take things extremely literally in the past. And this also comes up in Christian apologetics, all the way back to the 2nd and 3rd century. People were saying, well, these people would not have become martyrs voluntarily if they didn't believe in the literal truth of it, including some of the original followers of Jesus. But the problem with that is that there's all kinds of people who I'm thinking particularly of the U.S. military, who are perfectly willing to die for personal glory and the righteousness of the position of the government they're fighting for is almost not relevant. I mean, they like vaguely are like, yeah, I think we're on the right side, but like we probably do some screwed up stuff too. But I'm fighting for the man next to me, and I'm gonna get a Medal of Honor, and I'm gonna go down in the blaze of glory, and it's gonna be epic. It's in the like the mythic, poetic sense of the word,
right?
And people actually will do strange things to their body and die, and in various other ways take things extremely seriously that they don't believe in literally. And the willingness to do things to that level of extremity is not as much evidence of literal belief as people often assume.
Or maybe, it's a question of what is literal belief. I mean, are we talking about, me and you sitting here and looking at something on paper and being like, this doesn't check out? Or is it have to do with, like, say, the madness of crowds? What you really need to start a good cult is buy-in. And if you get a handful of guys that are all believe the same thing and they start affirming each other, and that's what you had happen with the leftist things that have happened the past few years. You get a whole bunch of people in a room and they start affirming each other around in a circle, and then they get an identity. They create a shared identity. I'm trying to do this, but in a not crazy or evil way.
Yeah, and
with the Order of Fire,
but create an identity that isn't at violent odds with reality.
Right. I'm trying to create an identity that like I can, go to sleep at night and think I did a good thing. But you can really get people together and create all kinds of identities very quickly, and create an us versus them, and then it becomes a self-perpetuating circle of this is our identity and this is who we are, and then they defend that identity, and then I think in a lot of ways literal belief comes out of that, in terms of that becomes so real and everyone else around me, all my friends think it's real.
Yeah.
And like if you get people to, I mean, I'm sure there's some psychological studies and things that have been done about like, you know, if you get 10 people in a room who didn't see a crime happen, but they start to all say that it happened, it happened. You know,
Or
I'm
imagine
sure
an
that,
entire state that becomes convinced that it saw UFOs. Could that
yeah,
happen?
yeah. If it becomes like, I mean, that's UFOs are a good one too. Like they're always, you know, like, you know, touching people's butts and like and eating cows or whatever. But you know, like there's that's a
Watch out.
mythology that like perpetuates itself. You know, that's a very, you know, then who knows? Maybe they really are. I don't know. But yeah, I think that thing really happens. That belief, that's when the belief thing really happens. And maybe this is me becoming like Richard Dawkins or whatever. But there is a thing that happens in the human mind
It
that
can, but
it
like,
can run away into that area. And if it's affirmed by everybody, it's just normal.
yeah.
You know,
Well,
and so
that can be.
and who's to say that's wrong? It's actually it's a human norm, right? I mean, it's happened in every society. Like that's you can have a whole bunch of people buy into something, and it becomes their identity. And I think that's what's happened. That's the case with I think a lot of Christians is that they want the collective identity,
Yeah, but
and
there are
you're fighting
some
for their
kinds
identity. You
of
know,
there are some kinds of beliefs which lend themselves to um uh, that transition into from abstract to literal belief.
right?
And then there are other kinds of beliefs that don't lend themselves to that transition. Um, for Santa has been around for a couple hundred years now. We still don't take him literally, although we sort of make the motions of literalism around small children. Um,
Right.
but like all of the imposter Santas walking around malls, like that's not a big gesture of you know modernist literalism. But it doesn't stop us from taking it seriously.
Right.
Whereas there are other things where a certain degree of literalism doesn't just happen, perhaps as a byproduct of cognitive dissonance or something else, but is almost required by the nature of the belief. Like if its legitimacy is contingent upon truth, then if it doesn't become believed in some literalist way, then it will just fade away. Like, suppose the Christopher McCandless story began to take off, but then it was revealed that, oh, wait, Christopher McCandless actually didn't die. He's fine. Um, and he's living with his wife and, uh, you know, kid in Montana somewhere. That foundation of what could have been a cult would just kind of go away. It would just kind of evaporate. Um, but if you were to, but there's no historical evidence you could possibly bring up. No possible uh physics argument or mathematical argument that could destroy an emerging Grinch cult. It's not the kind of belief that lends itself to literalism. So, and it's and any Redditor who says, "Well, you're teaching kids lies," as Wilhelmer is bringing up, is like that's not so much lying to yourself as it is failing to recognize the genre you're dealing with. Like this is like saying all novelists are liars. It's just a bad uh, understanding of how our brains work and what we are doing. Um, Basically,
Yeah.
so I don't know if there's anything else to bring up here. I thought there was a serious point to some of Wilhelmer's earlier points, but I think this is just bad comments.
Yeah. Yeah. And, which is fine. Yeah, like there's so many people that are, like I said, are just looking for some identity to buy into.
Yeah, and
and
they should,
that's a big part of it. Yeah.
it's important. Um, and that's I think one of the great reasons and justifications for elevating the Santa cult specifically is that it's a much better identity than a lot of the alternatives. There are a lot of cheap commercial identities that are lame and shallow and effervescent and or like don't make you a deeper and higher version of yourself. Um, and I mean the cults that people are most wary of, and the tricky thing is you don't necessarily know which one is which in advance, are the cults that will that just exist to take advantage of you and to fleece you of money or your spouse or whatever. Wilhelmer saying it's a Fyodor Dostoevsky quote, and that makes sense. And Dostoevsky, I believe he was the anarchist Christian, wasn't he? I I'm one of these people who thinks that the Russian authors are dramatically overrated. I think there's no book that is more metaphysically wrong on its first sentence than Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. He gets good and evil exactly backwards, like first sentence, and it doesn't get much better than there. And it's all sad and depressing and just weird. Maybe it makes
It's a bad weather place.
it might just be that I'm not sufficiently Russision to appreciate.
I know. Well, that's also
possible.
a thing. I mean, you will never be Russian. We'll never know. We'll never know the dark, cold, wintry souls that they have. But anyway, yeah, we can wrap this up, I think. But the idea, the important thing about this is how much it sheds light on how much people are participating in rituals, levels of belief in things, and how cultural ideas can take on a life of their own, even though they were manufactured. Like they were created by artists, and they take on this life of their own and become important to people. And really, all that takes is some momentum. You get enough people doing a thing, and it'll take off. And we have that with all these things. We did a show on Warhammer 40K, and the level of knowledge that those guys have on that fictional thing. I mean, it might as well be real.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a level of, I mean, and it's a powerful myth for them that they can talk about, and it's inspiring for them in a lot of ways, and that's what we're really about, is kind of finding those
the way that
myths.
Poetry is real,
right?
It makes sense to talk about poetry being real, like
right.
It's something to chew on for a while, but to me, the great point is that a religion does not need to be, or a hero cult or a god cult does not need to be a story you believe in, as Greg Nosh words it, to be legitimate. A story you live by or participate in because it's a good story is also legitimate, and is maybe more honest. Given that we don't have access to the truth, much as we would like to. We can believe in truth in the abstract. We can say there is an objective world out there, but we have no way of verifying that with certainty. And so maybe the best we can do is to say what's beautiful and what's good, and not make the mistake of conflating the good and the beautiful with what is, like, capital T, true. And I think Santa does that very well.
Yes, I agree. As much as I think Christmas is tacky. But anyway, it's not my favorite. It's not my favorite aesthetic holiday. It's very northeastern. But anyway, thanks guys for watching. Hit like and subscribe, share, all that. And just want, obviously I'm going to start a push tomorrow. I wasn't able to edit video as much as I wanted to today, but we really are trying to get some new guys into the Order of Fire and the First Men. We're excited about a bunch of stuff that is new and that we have going on, and we have going into the new year. is a good time to join, because we're going to, obviously, a lot of people will be tracking their fitness. A lot of people will be like doing accountability programs. We're starting up some new teams and some new different projects. And so we are going to be pushing people to apply, especially people who've been following us for a long time. It's like, if you're still following us, you like what we have to say, so you should join our club. But anyway, all right, guys. See you later. Stay solar.
Stay solar.
Thank you for watching or listening to the Journal of Solar Culture. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and leave us a comment. The first volume of our journal is available in paperback and now, finally, on Kindle. Pick it up in our store or on Amazon.